You didn't just watch a routine royal statement today. You watched a system, an ancient, carefully guarded institution, reach its absolute breaking point. For months, the world has been fed a diet of polished palace lines, vague updates about planned surgeries, and a narrative of privacy that felt more like a fortress than a medical necessity. But tonight, that fortress has a crack. Prince William, the man groomed from birth to prioritize the crown over the individual, has finally broken his silence on the missing months of Princess Kate. And what he has revealed isn't just a health update, it is a confession. To understand why this moment is so destabilizing, you have to understand the architecture of royal silence. In the corridors of Buckingham Palace, silence is not an absence of noise, it is a weapon of control. For nearly half a year, the public was left in a vacuum of information, a space quickly filled by conspiracy theories and international skepticism. Why were there no authentic photos? Why were global agencies forced to kill images that didn't meet the standard of reality? The palace told us it was about privacy. But as I've watched this pattern in every fragile institution, privacy is often the last shield used to hide a truth that is simply too uncomfortable to manage. William's decision to speak now with a tone that is visibly shaken, a departure from the stiff upper lip protocol, suggests that the internal pressure has become unsustainable. He is no longer just the future king. He is a husband who has watched the woman holding the emotional center of the monarchy nearly slip away, while the palace machine prioritized optics over her humanity. This isn't just about a diagnosis of cancer. It's about what happens behind closed doors when the gears of a public institution grind against the raw vulnerability of a human being. Imagine a grand clock in an old castle. The hands are moving, the face is polished. But inside, the gears have been worn down to the point of failure. If the king and his heir have to overrule their entire court just to tell a version of the truth, we are not looking at a stable monarchy. We are looking at a crisis of trust that Kate's missing months didn't just cause, they exposed. As we peel back the layers of this statement, you'll realize that the shock isn't in the medical details alone. It's in the admission that for months, the mask wasn't just slipping, it was being held up by a system that was more afraid of the truth than of the scandal. To truly grasp the weight of William's admission, we must look into the shadows of those missing months, a period where Princess Kate didn't just vanish from the cameras. She was systematically erased from the public record. In the world of high-level power, obscurity is the ultimate camouflage. When the palace machine decided to go dark, they weren't just protecting a patient, they were testing the limits of how much reality they could manipulate. According to emerging reports, during these months, the tension between Prince William and the men in gray suits, the institutional handlers, reached a fever pitch. William was caught in a brutal tug-of-war. The loyalty to his wife's raw, human suffering versus the monarchy's obsession with looking invincible. Why does this matter? Because in elite circles, presence is everything. For years, Kate has been the atmospheric glue of the royal family, present at every dinner, every opening, every curated snapshot. She was the one who made the ancient institution feel modern, relatable, and safe. When she disappeared, the atmosphere turned toxic. The palace tried to populate the void with old narratives and recycled updates, but as we've seen in the Epstein files or the Soho House scandals, you cannot hide a presence that people have grown to rely on. The vacuum didn't just invite curiosity, it invited an autopsy of the palace's credibility. William's break in silence hints at a disturbing truth. The funding of the silence was becoming more expensive than the truth itself. International media agencies, once loyal allies of the crown, began to rebel. The kill notice on the Mother's Day photo was the shot heard round the world. It was the moment the press stopped asking, "How is she?" and started asking, "What are you hiding?" In his latest reflections, William isn't just talking about a recovery timeline. He is acknowledging that the curtain of discretion had become a shroud. He is describing a period of international flights, high-level social shields, and private medical sanctuaries where even senior peers were kept at arm's length. This is where the story shifts from a medical drama to a systemic failure. The missing months were a masterclass in institutional erasure. Photographs from her past were restricted, licensing was tightened, and the search results for her condition were curated to the point of sterility. But documentation has a way of outliving directives. As William begins to recount the internal fractures, he is admitting that the price of the crown was nearly his family's sanity. The shock isn't just that she was ill, it's that the system was prepared to let her disappear into a curated obscurity rather than admit that the Princess of Wales was as fragile as the people she serves. To understand the depth of the missing months, we have to look at what I call the geography of secrecy. In the world of the elite, when someone disappears, they don't just stay home. They move through a curated ecosystem of private clinics, high-security retreats, and invisible corridors where discretion is the only law. Prince William's admission hints at a timeline that doesn't just involve a hospital bed in London, but a global network of medical consultants and private sanctuaries that were designed to keep the world and even other members of the royal family at bay. This wasn't just about recovery, it was about containment. In the legal world, specifically within the narratives we've seen in cases like Epstein's, there is a concept called proximity as evidence. Presence does not equal guilt, but it does equal opportunity. During those missing months, Princess Kate became a witness to her own institutionalization. William's struggle, as he now reveals, was witnessing the slow erosion of his wife's identity, as it was being replaced by a palace-approved version of a patient. The shock in this narrative is the realization that Kate was positioned within social and medical ecosystems where the boundaries of her autonomy were allegedly blurred behind closed doors. According to emerging reports from within the legal back channels, there was a period where Kate's residency was shifted multiple times to avoid jurisdiction from the prying eyes of the international press. Much like the archive restrictions we see on Getty Images for controversial figures, the digital footprint of the princess during this time was being scrubbed in real time. Flight paths of private jets were masked, and guest lists for the clinics she attended were purged of any names that could anchor a timeline. William is now describing a world where phones were discouraged, records were minimal, and what happened inside the medical fortress was meant to stay inside. But why the extreme containment? Analysts point to a familiar pattern. When an institution achieves a certain level of status, it becomes invested in its own cleanliness. If Kate's condition was more complex than the public was led to believe, the palace had every incentive to overwrite history before it even became record. In this framework, William's break in silence is a direct challenge to the institutional erasers. He is admitting that for months, he was a silent partner in a game of narrative consolidation. The shock isn't just that they lied, it's that the system was so efficient at the lie that it took the future king himself to fracture the silence. The digital fingerprint of a deception is often harder to erase than the deed itself. In the heart of Kate's missing months, the palace attempted a maneuver that would go down as the single greatest public relations catastrophe in modern royal history: the Mother's Day photo. It was supposed to be the silence breaker, the visual proof of life that would end the whispering once and for all. Instead, it became the forensic evidence that the palace was no longer dealing in reality. Prince William, in his recent admissions, has finally touched on the pressure behind that specific image, a moment where the institution's desire to manufacture perfection collided with a digital world that can no longer be fooled. In my decade of analyzing power structures, the Mother's Day photo wasn't just a clumsy edit, as the official apology claimed. It was a failure of the royal filter. For a century, the monarchy has survived because we saw them through a soft, untouchable lens. But when the kill notice was issued by global news agencies like AP and Reuters, the lens didn't just blur, it shattered. This was the moment the public stopped being observers and became detectives. William is now describing the internal panic of that week, the frantic efforts to fix a narrative that was already bleeding out. He is acknowledging that the decision to release a manipulated image was an act of desperation, a sign that the missing months had left the palace without a single authentic frame to offer. This is the shock within the shock. We aren't just talking about a photo, we are talking about the death of institutional trust. When a future king and queen are caught in a digital lie, the entire social contract of the monarchy is renegotiated. William admits that the missing months weren't just a period of recovery, but a period of frantic damage control, where the palace tried to use digital layering to substitute for a physical presence. They underestimated the forensic gaze of the public. Every pixel, every misaligned sleeve, and every blurred background was a message from the palace that said, "We cannot show you the truth, so we will build you a version of it." This is where our analysis uncovers the deepest layer. The palace thought they could treat the public like subjects of a bygone-era people who would accept what they were given without question. But in the 21st century, obscurity doesn't lead to reverence. It leads to an autopsy. William's break in silence on this specific failure is perhaps his most honest moment yet. He is admitting that the missing months forced the crown into a corner where they prioritized the image of the monarchy over the integrity of the woman within it. They didn't just fail to protect Kate, they failed to protect the very truth that holds the monarchy together. When Prince William finally broke his silence on those missing months, the most chilling part of his confession wasn't about the chemotherapy or the surgeries. It was about the silence inside the house. While the world was screaming for a photo, William was living in a home that had become a gilded vacuum. He is now describing a period where the future King of England had to act as a shield, not just for a sick wife, but for 3 young children who were watching their world shift in real time. This is the human cost that the palace accounts never mention the reality that while the monarchy is an institution of stone and history, it is powered by the fragile hearts of a single family. In my years of analyzing these power structures, I have seen a recurring tragedy: the sacrifice of the individual for the stability of the institution. During those months, George, Charlotte, and Louis weren't just protected from the media. They were living within a fortress of secrets. William admits that the hardest part of the silence was the weight of the lie he had to maintain, for his children's sake, the need to keep the outside world from infecting the nursery. But secrets have a way of poisoning the atmosphere. When a mother vanishes from public view and a father becomes a shadow of himself, no amount of palace toys or private tutors can hide the truth that something is fundamentally broken. The shock here is the admission of vulnerability. William is acknowledging that the stiff upper lip protocol, the very thing that saved the monarchy during the Blitz, nearly destroyed his family during the missing months. He describes a house where the laughter had stopped, where the focus wasn't on service to the crown, but on surviving the next hour. By choosing to speak now, William is effectively saying that the monarchy's obsession with never complain, never explain, had become a suicide pact. He is revealing that the missing months were not just a medical recovery, but a period of intense, private grief that was being masked by a public facade of indifference. This is where we see the heir's dilemma. William was groomed to be a king, to put the institution first, always. But during those months, he realized that if he lost Kate, the monarchy he was set to inherit would be a hollow, meaningless shell. His break in silence is a rebellion against his own training. He is telling the men in gray suits that he is a husband first and an heir second. The shock isn't just in the details of the illness, it's in the profound shift of priorities. The missing months forced the future king to realize that the most important crown he wears isn't the one made of gold and jewels, but the one made of the trust and love within his own 4 walls. In the quietest corners of the British establishment, there is a saying, "The crown does not leak, it breathes." But during Princess Kate's missing months, the crown wasn't breathing, it was suffocating under the weight of its own secrets. Prince William's decision to break his silence now is, in many ways, an act of narrative reclamation. He is finally acknowledging a shadow war that has been raging behind the scenes between his own team at Kensington Palace and the traditionalists at Buckingham Palace, the men in grey suits, who believe that institutional survival is worth any amount of human collateral. The shock in this admission is the realization that the missing months were characterized by a complete breakdown of internal communication. William describes a period where the palace's attempts to control the story actually created the very leaks they were trying to prevent. When you create a vacuum of information, you don't just invite gossip, you invite digital treason. Sources close to the inner circle began to leak fragments of the truth, not out of malice, but out of a desperate need for the institution to act like it belonged in the 21st century. William is now admitting that the missing months were a period of intense internal friction, where the future king found himself at odds with the very bureaucracy he is meant to lead. This is the strategic leak dynamic. In my analysis of power structures, when an institution loses control of the narrative, the only way to survive is to break the silence before the leaks consume you. William's statement is a calculated strike against the shadow court. He is revealing that the missing months weren't just about Kate's physical health, but about the mental health of an heir who realized that his own support system was prepared to gaslight the public to maintain a facade of normalcy. The shock is the admission that the Prince of Wales felt more betrayed by the palace's machinery than by the press's intrusion. By breaking his silence, William is effectively resetting the monarchy's communication strategy. He is signaling the end of the never complain, never explain era. He is admitting that the missing months were a failure of transparency that nearly cost the crown its relationship with the people. The shock isn't just that the princess was away, it's that the system was so dysfunctional it couldn't even tell a simple truth without turning it into an international scandal. William isn't just updating us on Kate, he is declaring war on the shadows that tried to keep her hidden. When an institution as ancient as the British monarchy feels threatened, it doesn't just hide the present, it begins to rewrite the past. During Princess Kate's missing months, a subtle but systematic archival purge began to take place across the global media landscape. Prince William's latest admissions point to a disturbing reality. The palace wasn't just managing a medical crisis, they were managing a legacy. He is now describing a period where certain images, records, and even associations from Kate's pre-royal and early royal years were being restricted or removed from public view. In the world of power, this is known as the memory hole. If the public cannot see the history no longer exists. The shock in this revelation is the scale of the coordination. William hints at high-level discussions with major image archives like Getty Images and other global agencies to limit the licensing of inconvenient photographs, images that might anchor a timeline or suggest a proximity to individuals the palace now wishes to distance itself from. This wasn't just about privacy. It was about institutional sanitization. As William breaks his silence, he is admitting that the missing months were used as a window of opportunity to consolidate Kate's narrative into something more sterile, more controllable, and ultimately, more royal. They weren't just protecting a sick woman, they were cleaning her profile to ensure that once she returned, there would be no threads left for the public to pull. This is the erasure effect. In my decade of Boktash, dissecting power, I've seen this pattern before. When status is achieved, the past becomes a liability. During the missing months, the palace attempted to turn Kate into a historical abstraction, a figure whose only reality was the one they provided. William is now revealing the internal conflict he felt as he watched his wife's actual history being traded for institutional cleanliness. He describes the frustration of seeing her identity being edited in real time by committees of people who prioritized the brand over the being. The shock isn't just in the missing photos. It's in the realization that the monarchy views its members as assets to be edited, rather than humans to be heard. By breaking his silence on this archival scrubbing, William is exposing the systemic fraud of the modern PR machine. He is admitting that the monarchy's survival now depends on a digital sleight of hand, a game of shadows, where the truth is whatever hasn't been deleted yet. The missing months were a laboratory for this new kind of power, a test to see if the world would notice when pieces of the puzzle started to vanish. But William's confession suggests the test failed. You cannot erase a woman who has already been etched into the hearts of the public. He is finally declaring that the era of the memory hole is over, and the truth, no matter how inconvenient, must finally be allowed to breathe. The most dangerous thing for an institution that survives on mystique is the moment the public stops being fans and starts being detectives. During Princess Kate's missing months, the social contract between the monarchy and the people didn't just fray, it shattered. Prince William's decision to break his silence today is a desperate attempt to mend a bond that may be permanently broken. He is now admitting that the palace profoundly misjudged the modern world. They thought they were dealing with subjects who would wait patiently for a curated update. Instead, they were dealing with a global, interconnected forensic public that treats every pixel of royal silence as a crime scene to be investigated. In my analysis of this crisis, the missing months represented the death of the parasocial dream. For decades, the public felt they knew Kate. She was the one who was always there, always smiling, always authentic. When the palace replaced that person with a vacuum, and then filled that vacuum with manipulated imagery, the public felt a deep sense of personal betrayal. William is now acknowledging the forensic gaze, the reality that millions of people spent their nights analyzing shadows in a car window or the alignment of a tile in a garden photo. He is admitting that the missing months turned the royal residence from a fairy tale palace into a forensic laboratory, where every official statement was dissected for DNA-level evidence of a lie. This is the shock of the 8th chapter, the admission that the monarchy has lost its moral monopoly. William describes a period where the palace's authority was no longer enough to silence the crowd. By going dark for months, they surrendered the narrative to the shadow detectives of the internet. He reveals the internal frustration of seeing the monarchy being deplatformed by its own secrecy. The missing months proved that in the 21st century, transparency is not a choice, it is a condition of survival. William is finally admitting that the palace's attempt to protect Kate actually left her and the institution more vulnerable than ever before. By breaking his silence, William is attempting to renegotiate the terms of royal visibility. He is signaling an end to the gilded wall. He is admitting that during those missing months, the palace acted like an 18th-century court in a 24-hour news cycle, and the result was a catastrophe of trust. The shock isn't just that Kate was ill, it's the admission that the future king realized that if the monarchy cannot be honest with its people during a crisis, it no longer has the right to lead them. He is finally stepping out from behind the curtain, acknowledging that the public's right to know is the only thing that will keep the crown on his head. There is a profound difference between a wound that heals and a wound that scars. As Prince William finally breaks his silence on the missing months, he is not just describing a recovery, he is describing a permanent transformation of the British monarchy. He is admitting that the missing months didn't just change Kate's health, they changed the DNA of the crown. This is what insiders are calling the Kate reset, the moment the institution realized that its survival no longer depends on its ancient mystery, but on its modern humanity. The shock of this 9th chapter is the realization that the future king has decided to stop being a symbol and start being a man. In my decade of analyzing these power structures, I have never seen a shift this seismic. William is revealing that during those dark months, the palace attempted to treat Kate like a historical artifact to be preserved, but he is now admitting that she is the only person who actually understands the stakes. By coming forward with her own video without the palace filter, Kate effectively reset the monarchy's relationship with the public. William describes the internal realization that the missing months had stripped away the gold leaf and the velvet, leaving only the raw, frightening reality of two people trying to save their family. He is admitting that the shock isn't the cancer, it's the fact that it took a life-threatening crisis to force the monarchy to be honest. This is the vulnerability paradox. In the past, the royals thought that showing weakness would lead to their downfall. William is now admitting that the opposite is true. The missing months proved that the public doesn't want a perfect queen. They want a real one. He describes a period where the palace tried to manufacture strength, only to realize that Kate's honest vulnerability was her greatest power. The shock here is the admission that the men in gray suits were wrong. Transparency didn't destroy the crown, it saved it. William is revealing that he has seen the end of the old world, the world of never complain, never explain, and he is not going back. As William concludes this part of his confession, he is signaling a new era of aggressive authenticity. He is admitting that the missing months were a trauma that the institution will carry forever. But he is also saying that the scar is a mark of survival. The shock isn't just in the details of the secrecy. It's in the admission that the future king and queen are no longer willing to be the palace's puppets. they have reclaimed their narrative, and in doing so, they have redefined what it means to lead. The missing months are no longer a gap in the record. They are the foundation of a new kind of monarchy, one that values truth over tradition and humanity over history. We have reached the end of the silence, but we are only at the beginning of the story. As Prince William concludes his unprecedented break in silence, the air around the British monarchy feels different, thinner, colder, but undeniably clearer. The missing months were never just a gap in the calendar. They were a crucible. They were the fire that burned away the last remnants of Victorian secrecy and forced a 1,000-year-old institution to look at itself in the unforgiving mirror of the 21st century. The legacy of these months isn't a medical file. It is a manifesto for a new kind of power, one that realizes that the only thing more dangerous than a truth is the silence used to hide it. In my final analysis, the missing months changed the definition of royal service. We are no longer looking at a king in waiting who is a slave to the men in gray suits. We are looking at a man who has looked into the abyss of institutional betrayal and chosen his family over the machine. William's admission is a warning to the shadow court. The era of the memory hole is over. He has signaled that his reign will be defined by an aggressive authenticity that prioritizes the human heart over the institutional image. The shock isn't that the monarchy nearly broke. It's that it had to break in order to become something worth keeping. But as the curtain falls on this crisis, the final question remains for us, the forensic public. Will we allow the palace to retreat back into the shadows once the headlines fade? Or will we hold them to this new standard of transparency? Prince William's break in silence has given us a seat at the table. But that seat comes with a responsibility to keep watching. The missing months proved that the monarchy is only as strong as the truth it tells. Kate has reset the crown. William has shattered the silence. And now, the path forward is an uncharted frontier, where the only compass is the honest connection between a leader and their people. The shock of the missing months was a wake-up call for the world. It showed us that even in the highest towers of power, the most basic human needs for truth, for compassion, and for agency are the things that matter most. Prince William and Princess Kate have survived the system, and in doing so, they have redefined the very meaning of the crown. The silence is broken. The mask is gone. And as we look toward the future, we realize that the monarchy's greatest strength isn't its history, it's its newfound ability to be real. The missing months are over, but the era of the truth has just begun.